It's time to go on a journey into this weird world. So welcome, Jackie, to the podcast, video, YouTube form that I'm putting this out in. How are you doing today?
I'm doing really well, and I'm really glad to be here, sharing space with you. So thank you.
I am really excited about today because I love our conversations when we have them, and we normally don't record them. And I'm so excited to just share our energy and our conversation and our alignment. And I do really want to land the audience in who you are and where you are. Do you want to lead in with that, or do you want to come back to that at a later moment? Does it feel like
Yeah, yeah, I can share. My name's Jacqueline Allen, and I live in Buena Vista, Colorado, and I'm a full-time practicing acupuncturist and astrologer. And I'm deeply connected with all things holistic and just remembering wholeness, and whether that be wisdom from the earth, wisdom from the sky and the cosmos, and really empowering the wisdom of story. So that I feel as I started to expand in all these different modalities that I synthesize for my clients, I come back to again and again the empowerment around story, whether that's what we're talking about in terms of pain conditions or illness or disease, or our life story and our history. And so yeah, I'm just really inspired to use all forms of really, for me it's all medicine, be it the astrology or the acupuncture, the herbs, um, using that medicine to really empower people. So that's a little bit about me.
beautiful? And that empowerment piece just really flows through everything that you do. And I think that's why I wanted to do these recordings with you or do these conversations, because the way that you kind of bring story, bring that experiential knowing through language is always really landed in me. Like, we're able to communicate in a way that feels really aligned and connected, and yeah, always so beautiful. And what we wanted to do really, when Jackie and I were kind of coming up with this podcast, this show, this episode, I have traditionally done a single episode about something, whether it be the Wyrd sisters or whether it be something to do with the cycles or tarot. But what I really wanted to do with Jackie was to work through particular themes and to sit with them, to kind of channel them, to bring myth and story through that linked to them, and then for us to have just an open conversation around that theme and to share our stories, so that we really take a subject, a topic, and just kind of break it open in the way that we are guided to do, that comes through at the time that we're sharing it in that container of that theme. Now, Jackie and I tried to do a previous episode about 6 months ago, and we decided to, what kind of brought us together in a kind of close relational way was talking about death. And so when we decided to do an episode, we decided to do it on the topic of death, and we recorded something, but we haven't sort of done anything with it. It sort of sat to the side. And then I decided, let's create more of a formula. Let's create this sort of theme where we take topics. So I thought I would use the tarot as a way to guide us to sort of see which card came up as this is the theme to start with. And we pulled the cards, and the card that came out was death again. So death really wants to be spoken to, spoken about. And so this conversation is going to be an open conversation about death, a bit about channeling death and our own experiences of death, which sounds pretty heavy, but I think that's part of when you're conjuring, when you're meeting, when you're working with a theme, you want to feel into it, you want to get into those depths so you can really unpack it. And I think the only way to do that is really to bring our experience to that as well. And then Jackie has recorded some beautiful myths related to death, which I will share as well. So how I'm going to formulate that, I'm not sure, but you all listening will discover that as the month draws on. So are you ready to begin our journey to death?
Yes, yes. I feel really connected, and because of the multiplicity and the ways that it's shown up for us, it feels in deep alignment, and yeah, a sort of sacredness emerging in conversation. So
Yeah, I'm really excited to share. And I think we both have really quite strong stories around death. I actually don't know if you've experienced your own death, but I have done shamanic work where I've experienced mine. And I thought that would be an interesting part to bring into of our experience being the mourner, being kind of in death, but not the one who's dying, and then to be in the kind of place of death. Just going through cycles in our life is a form of death as well, but we can speak to that. I think where I will start is possibly what happened today. So I'll share the channeling because I feel that that is something that maybe wants to come through. So this morning in preparation for this, in fact, I hadn't done anything. So I had just sort of woken up this morning knowing we were going to be doing this recording. And I was just making breakfast and I had this overwhelming sensation to go and meditate. And I really didn't feel like sitting silently and doing kind of full meditation. But the message was just sit anywhere. Don't worry about going up to, the space I normally meditate. Don't worry about trying to go into stillness. Just go and sit down. So I was just sitting in my sitting room. And as soon as I closed my eyes, I immediately saw this figure walking up my pathway to the door. And I'm going to say he, was clad in these heavy, dark, kind of torn materials, and was all sort of shrouded in this sort of heavy garb, really. And he came walking up to the door, and I got up in my mind's eye and walked to the door. And I said, only those who come with love are allowed in. And there was no movement. And then I realized who it was, and I realized that death was right outside my door. And he said, are you afraid to come out? And I said, I'm not afraid of you. I'm not afraid of dying. I don't want to die right now, but I'm not afraid of it. I just don't want to be drawn out of a space of protection if it's not part of my purpose, like it's not part of what's okay for me. So I do this whenever I meet a being. I make sure that I'm in a place of protection. So I called my guides around me and I was reassured that it was okay to go outside with death. So I stepped outside and immediately I felt him take me and just start lifting me into the air. And he said, I want to show you who I am. And he lifted me and lifted me and lifted me up until I was quite high, looking down on the land where I was living. And time just rolled back into the past quickly. And we went way back into the past and everything around me looked completely different. And then it started very slowly rolling forward and then quicker and quicker and quicker. And I saw he was just showing me the death of people and the death of things and the change of things. And from that vantage point, from high up and with a moving quick, a quickly moving pace of hundreds of years in just an instant, I could see deaths just rolling through, just like a kind of swarm of deaths across the country, across the world. It was just like this constant flow of death. And I understood, and I don't know if I'm kind of passing it on as well, but I understood that it's really the closeness, the kind of, when you take space and time, when you expand and elongate that, death is almost like this water, this flow of energy. And when you're just looking at one side, you can just see everything kind of flowing down and then flowing down. It's just a constant like rippling, essentially, of people dying. But then when he put in the births and the life as lights, so as there was the rippling into the death, there was all of these lights coming up, and there was just this beautiful rhythm, like waves. So like the still water of kind of just the deaths, like turned into these rocking waves of death and life and death and life. And it was something that was so beautiful. And he said, it's like a breath, Tansy. It's like when you breathe in, like that baby taking a breath in, a gasp of air and life begins. And you can think of life as being this kind of great, deep breath from the moment you're born until like the kind of height of your life. And then a exhaling, exhaling, exhaling until you sigh out back into the abyss. So he said it's like this breath. And that silence at the end of the breath is the end, and the silence at the beginning of the breath is the just about to come in. And he says, that is where I sit. I sit at that transition. I am there at the birth, and I am there at the death. I am the doorway. And he said, I operate like I exist in the transition. It's not what I think about it or what I feel about it. I am it. I am transition. I am in that flux. But why you call me in despair or why you think I don't care, it's because I can see from this position the beauty of what I bring. And he then brought me back down to my door, and there was this, he just said, I just really want that to be shared. I just really want you to share that for me. And it was strange because the whole time it was this quite masculine energy, and I sort of went to almost hug death or sort of reach out, and she then kissed me on the forehead like a mother would. And it was this and so it almost felt like he became a she. It was a really, and that was the transitioning. It was a very interesting experience. And then I was back at my door and he was gone. And then I sort of woke up and realized I needed to go and have my breakfast. And it was such so that's sort of how I wanted to start, because I just wanted to share that experience with everyone, basically. It was extraordinary.
Yeah, I'm feeling a call to just even be silent with that for just a moment. It's so powerful. I really feel the tenderness and the love that you were connected with at the end. And energetically, that feels deeply in alignment with how I've been feeling into this energy, this wanting for a voice to be had from that energy, and having that be this message of sacredness and love. It's interesting you were calling, that flow, and death spoke to, it's like the breath, this, and then the out. One of my yoga teachers calls the breath the beloved, and how we always have our beloved with us, but it is the full breath. It is the inhale and the exhale. But I love that word, transition, that has come through, and the softness and the wisdom. There's so much like gentle wisdom there. I think so often in our own experience, our lived experience of that energy coming to our door, where however it has, quite abruptly often for many of us, this sense of um, taking something that's ours versus the energy of the ebb and the flow, and this, I love that image of the wave. It's like, who's swimming where when that, next tidal wave comes, and none of us know, if that's going to be the current that's going to, take us under, if that will be our time for transition of this body, if we're talking about physical, literal death of life as we know it. But my partner, he's always said this. He says, if you love life, then you love death. I'm always in such awe of how you can connect with those energies, and I'm just so, it feels really impactful to have that be what's being shared here now. It's a really powerful image.
I feel really blessed that I know how to hold that now. I think for many years, if something like that had happened, I would have been too afraid to go, or too afraid to open to the messages, or too uncertain about what I was experiencing. And I feel really blessed that my journey has allowed me to be able to commune in that way. And I felt really honored that he came to visit me, to share this. And he's consistently come back for us, to be shared. And I think there is a want, just like what your boyfriend says, is like the love of life as well as the love of death. It's like, it's the same breath. It's the same cycle of the breath, is like coming into life and moving into death. It's part of the experience. And so we cannot love life without loving death, because we would have no life without death. And yet I feel death, it's not that there is any sense of human care about what we think. It is just neutral, but I think there is a sense of misunderstanding that is more wanting to be imparted. It's not like, oh, I wish that people would care for me. It's more that you're misunderstanding what I am. And I just want to show you, like, I'm not bad, I'm not good, I just am. And so is life. Life is not good, it's not bad, it just is. But there's an incredible magic and richness to that, incredible power that is so beyond what we understand. And so, yeah, I think that felt so powerful, but very different from, and I think that's why he wanted to take me far away. It's like the space and time element, because when you are in it, when you're in close proximity to it in space and time, that is where the suffering is most acute. And I was thinking, when he was also pointing that out, was with the birth, like there's a death, there's a suffering with the death, even if it's just mild, as you pass, even if you die falling asleep, maybe there isn't so much suffering. But mostly there's a suffering before death, and the same with the birth. Like when you're going through that tight birth canal, there's a huge amount of suffering for you and the mom, because you're in such close proximity to the experience. Yeah.
Yeah, they're always intertwined. I did I pulled a card before we started talking today, and I was just needing a little bit of messaging from my own guides, and coming to a space to potentially talk about death, share a story maybe. And my question was, how should I share this story? I was looking for that energy connection, and it is the butterfly. And it just really, really affirmed in another this death and rebirth, and the metamorphosis properties that continually take place in that space of transition. And my most powerful experience with death, losing a friend, that is how I saw her, was as a butterfly. and I can hold that space because at my scale of time is far from this instance that I'm holding in my heart. It's, you know, there has been enough time I've scaled just by living as long as I have, that I didn't have wisdom around me growing up with conversations, bringing in death, talking about how we see it in all ways, shapes, and forms in the world. It more was just this terror of, you know, let's not go there. Very, very fearful. And so when it does show up, which inevitably it does, not knowing how to sit with that. It's like never being taught how to swim in a sense, and just being thrown out into the waves. Whereas, I can learn a little bit of this rhythm. I can learn a little bit of how to be in this ocean of water and change. So yeah, I just smiled when I pulled that butterfly card.
Yeah. That felt so beautiful when you held it up to see the metamorphosis.
Mhm.
And I think from your own experience as well, of like the metamorphosis nature of death, but also of your own experience, like your own growth, your own flight. And
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I'm feeling the light beings that you were describing, and I do feel that an important aspect of having these conversations is to remind us that we get to energetically choose that light after a transformational experience. Um, I don't think it's always a given. I think we can keep ourselves trapped in the death wave long after our whole being wants to breathe in again and have new inspiration. And so much of my healing around my own journey, you know, losing my best friend when I was really young, 17, so much of my journey has been realizing, I'm not taking a new breath. Like I'm unconsciously, you know, choosing to stay in that death state. And this shift that I can feel in my own life, where it's like, I had to wake up again. Like I had to let myself move into the light. I actually had a powerful vision when I was doing acupuncture specific ancestry work, and I was wanting to heal this wound around losing my friend. I couldn't connect anymore. I couldn't feel safe to love. I was really trapped by my experience. And the vision that came to me on that treatment table when I went in full consciousness, okay, please, you know, support me in this transition, was I was this giant plant, and I was crouched over this incredibly decayed, incredibly old material. There was no life left in it anymore. It was like mulch in my hands. And I realized I'd just been crouched over. This has been dead for a long, long time. And I put it down and I just stood up, but I was this plant, and I just turned towards the light, turns towards the sun, as a really powerful shifting point. I do feel there's a little bit of divine timing around that. You know, I don't think we can rush the journey, but when it becomes available, having consciousness around that. It's just, in the world that I come from, and just with watching family members or friends walk their own journey of death, there's this sort of sensation or energy. Okay, now you have to grieve, and you have to grieve this forever. You must stay in this state. It absolutely is the worst thing that ever could have happened to you, and you must never let that go, because if you let it go, you're somehow letting that love or that person go. And it just feels so much the opposite for me as I've really stepped back into myself. And I feel, even just pulling this butterfly card, I mean, I feel, you know, this is my friend saying, please live, like, please, like step into your light. Like, I'm here with you. Like, and I want nothing more than for you to walk towards, you know, my light, where, you know, where she be, and feeling that fully. as opposed to the prison that I really, was keeping myself in. But yeah.
Mm. When you were saying about like that being in that prison, or when you were looking down at this mulch and staying protected and hiding away from that, from the light, so many people who are going through the experience of losing someone, of going into that mourning, feel like they are going in and down. It's that they can't face, like, even in like reality life, they can't kind of stand up straight and tall and face everything. It's like they want to just hide away and to kind of follow that person. I think it's like they want to follow that person down. There's almost like this energetic, that loss, that weight, that knowing that they're kind of going down in some ways into the earth, maybe obviously then to rise up, but it's like everything is curling in. And I think we can stay, like you say, in that place for so long because the grieving feels like our connection in a way to that person, that through the grief we are still praising that person, we're still loving that person, and we're showing it by showing how much we are grieving. But there does come a point, and sometimes it has to take a long time, that you realize that person has passed, and that actually all they would want from you is that love, is for you to be who you need to become, and to, like you say, to like lift up into the light, because that's where the light has always been. The light is always above you. It's just you can't always see it when you're down. And just, I think being in that process of death, it's almost like being in that chrysalis. So it's really interesting also where you got the butterflies, because it feels like you don't really know where is up and down. You don't know what you should be doing. You feel that you should be grieving when you don't feel like grieving, and you feel that there are times when you are grieving when you don't feel you should be, and nothing feels tangible. And that's just part of the experience of going through mourning. But then there is a point when, yeah, there is like the ability to step forward on your path and to sort of break out of who you were when you were in relationship to that person, and know that what is coming is an evolution of your own growth as well. I think we kind of forget about our own process through it. It's not just a mental process, it's like a physical, it's a spiritual growth that we've gone through when we lose someone close to us. It's not just us mourning a sad, the loss of someone. It's actually that we are being transformed, and that can be part of the fear. Is we were happy with how we were. We don't want the transformation. We don't want the loss. We don't want the change. And it's only when we accept that change is inevitable that we can step into that new version of ourselves. What I did want to see, if you wanted to talk about it and don't feel that you need to, was the real situation that happened.
I can share like my own sort of dissension, because it does, it's this, and even just thinking about the wave, the crest of a wave peaks, but it goes inward and down. And I think that's the way. I think that is the way, to think, oh, I don't resist change. I'll just stand while the ocean moves by me, is also trying to step outside of that natural flow. So I can speak to that, because I was a teenager and my life was headed in a certain direction. I was executive editor of my high school newspaper. I got really good grades, and I was intentioning to go to college to do journalism. And my friend, who she really was my soulmate. And I've had a couple soulmates since then, so she's not my only one, but she was my first one, that I would describe as like a soulmate. And we just really bonded over sort of the illusion of the world we were given. We just had so many questions, and we had so much curiosity and wanted to explore, and knew we needed different ways to engage with our world, to engage with life. And so we had started peering behind the veil. And after she died, and it was right around the winter solstice, it was the most devastating thing that I have to this day ever been through. And there was no preparation. Nobody knew how to hold me, being the survivor. There was always these, survivor guilt layers, absolutely. And the world couldn't hold me. The world couldn't contain me. The world didn't want to hold me. I was one who lived, and she was lost, and her parents and family rejected me. There was a lot of news happening and wanting to get the story, and another young soul lost too soon. And I completely pulled away from the world. I had to. The only reason I feel I did survive that time is because our mutual friends knew us and held, they could hold me. And so I had this connection of support. And I dropped out of all my classes. I reduced everything down. I just needed to graduate, and I still couldn't do that. All I needed was I wasn't executive editor-in-chief anymore. I could not show up for life. And all I had to do was pass an English class, and I couldn't even do that. So I failed. I didn't officially graduate high school on time. I had to go back to summer school, a life that nobody looking at me up until that point would have ever expected. And most people in the world thought, oh, she's lost. She's kind of going down a bad path, and it's unlikely she'll ever recover. With me, that's how I felt the world was receiving me. So I went to summer school. I graduated. And I was down in it. I was down in it for a long time. And I did not have support systems to really explore life and death in a more sacred way. I had so much guilt and so much pain and so much grieving, and to have that soulmate connection, that ripping apart of a bonding. And so I really ran from it for a while. I knew I couldn't stay where I had grown up, and I just had to get away from it. I had to get away from the people who knew us. I had to get away from it so I could feel myself differently. And it was this darkness that continued to emerge as it needed to. It was like I could only process so much, but then it would rush through again, and I would become incredibly overwhelmed and down, deep down again. And as I found my healing path, which has always been about recovering, reclaiming, remembering, figuring out how to live again. And I've always been supported. That's when I was able to really start connecting to her again. And it was when I was finally having these moments and these mentors that would come in my life and say, hey, you've done enough of the downward diving. If you continue these behaviors or moving in this direction, you're going to keep falling. Like, it's going to pull you down. There's only so much work I could do down there. And there were so many details that were left unanswered around her death. And so I always just had this want to know more, this want to really get to the truth of what happened and why. And so I finally just kept getting all these messages like you don't need to have an answer. You probably never will. And this sense that I either continue that trajectory and I just live kind of half alive, because it's more just half living, or I really live, and I really recognize and honor the transformation, this metamorphosis that truly has taken a hold of my life. I would not be who I am today. I would not be with my practice. I would not be engaged with the medicines that I am had I not gone through what I went through. And there's no way for me to not acknowledge that. And so I just land in this surrender. Um, this surrender to, this is my life, this is my story, these are things that are unchangeable, and no amount of me trying to get to the bottom of it or go back in time to try to make peace, or no amount of me grieving endlessly forever is going to allow me to live fully. And my sister, my soulmate, who I've connected with through other people several times, wants nothing more than for me to live fully. And I feel her support and love and pride when I couldn't feel it for so long, because all I could feel was my heartbreak. All I could feel was my shame and my guilt and my grief. And I felt that so strongly, so intensely, I couldn't even feel her anymore. So for me, this relationship to transition, this relationship to discomfort, to pain, to loss, is the turning towards that becomes the magnitude for the depth at which we can really step into our wholeness. And I see it in so many different ways and layers now. And I can use the word death, I could use the word transition, change. And it is that embracing that allows for the greatest emergence in divine timing. We can't rush a seed that's been planted to turn into a whole tree. This takes time. But on some level, even if we're in it and we can resist it and we can fight it, and I'm there, like there's lots of things I feel in my body and I'm like, no, not this way. But trying to feel into that, oh, but this is the flow of that energy, to get to bring a different level of awareness to it. But the word, and disease, it's like dis-ease. What are we so uncomfortable with that in a lot of modern modalities for healthcare, it's to turn off the messaging, to silence it, and to turn away from it. How can we stop that from happening? Versus my lived experience, which is that was getting me nowhere. I was attempting that energetically and emotionally with the loss of my friend. I had to turn towards it. I had to hold it. I had to thank it. I had to love it, and I had to surrender to it as my lived experience. But it's a big part of me, and it's not something I do readily share. And so there is this illusion for people who don't know my full story, not knowing that depth. And I feel there's the depth for all of us in some way, shape, or form that we have been greeted with, and the relating to it. How do we relate to it? How do we form that relationship to that energy?
I just want to first say thank you so much for sharing, for opening that experience to others to hear the processing and the grief and your lived experience. And I think it's so important to have conversation around it, to speak about it. It really, I think it can help others, and you don't know who it's going to touch by being able to share, but it's something that is so deeply personal when we go through something so profoundly difficult and traumatic, and like you say, like being pulled into those depths. It's a moment of deep transformation, and it allows you to be who you are today. And I feel so grateful for you sharing that. And I feel it's one of those strange gifts of life in some ways, where we can operate on one level, but we'll only become so much. Something about our soul has come in and wants for a transformation, a power to come through that is not possible when we don't get pulled into that other dimension. We don't know the depths of the down. Like, we can't know the depths of the up if we don't understand the depths of the down. We cannot fully transform if we haven't gone through Hades realm, into the suffering realm. There is something, it's a bit like the breath. It's a bit like the wave. This is something about the process of coming, of being pulled down, because, like you say, with that wave coming into oneself, you are taken in and you are taken down. And only by surrendering and accepting do you start to lift and rise back up, and you are a new person. You have come up with the power of Pluto, the power of Hades. Like, there is huge power in a shedding and in a rebirth, like that kind of the phoenix rising too. Like, so many ways, so many analogies to kind of reflect this tearing down to build up stronger, with more fire, with more understanding of one own self. But we can get stuck down there, and that's where so much of the pain and the trauma and the suffering, because there is suffering that is part of the process, but the suffering is endured if the door is not opened. If it's not accepted, the suffering stays, right? We stay within the suffering. And so when we start to accept and surrender, we meet it and we are released from it. Not fully, but it will always, it's like, I kind of imagine, diving down into the waves and like kind of being rinsed of so much of who we are. And then as we come back up, we've got a thin layer of experience that kind of like settles within us and like grows, like as part of our growth, a bit like the tree lines, right? Like the tree rings. There is something in that experience that adds to our strength, but it's always within us. And there was so much of what you were saying that was just making me think all of these things. The same with fear, when we run away from it, it chases us and it makes us more frightened. When we turn and run towards it and face it, it dissolves. And it's the same with suffering. The more that we kind of pull away from it, or even kind of go like not wanting it, we're almost within it. When we turn around to face it, we're like, okay, come in, bring it all in. Like, let me envelop you, let me feel you, let me experience you with every atom of my being. There is nothing, everything has been felt. So it starts to release and you get let go. And so that was just a little.
Yeah, and I'm connecting it just with a vision around compost and for compost to be compost and to be utilized as nutrition for the next growth cycle, it must be absorbed within. And I never connected it this way, but that pile that was in my hand and that vision is of being a plant. It's like, oh, I've robbed this very beautiful, nutritious soil from really being absorbed. And if we just hold some nice organic dirt out in the sun for long enough, it loses that viability. And so that's what I'm feeling when you're even talking about turning towards, because it does feel like you're being buried alive. It's not I turn towards and great, I'm gonna feel a hug and it's gonna soften. It's that, yes, please, like, bury me. Like, I accept this as compost, because if I don't, I truly rob myself and all the other parts of my life and the people that I relate with, I rob them of that fertile compost. And I'm just thinking about if I pass and feel, and I'm curious, if we have time, I do want to hear your experience of your own death, because I'm feeling just imagining if I died now and inevitably those I love would have sadness, would be on their own journey. I would want nothing more than to for our experience and that life and that moment of transition to be compost for them. I would want nothing more than the breakdown of who I was to turn into fertile soil. Uh, but it takes it takes a willing um, participant, it feels.
Yeah, I mean, some people get lost forever down there and they never fully rise. And I think that's why we have so many escape mechanisms like TV or alcohol or drugs, because it's a way to make it bearable, because you come out of yourself, because you are living in, you've been buried alive and you're staying down there. And so you're trying to distract yourself from the grief and the trauma and the experience. And sometimes that call isn't loud enough, or you just don't have the tools. You just don't know how to turn around and to embrace it. And so there is a stuckness. And I hope that through conversation, there are skills that we can bring, or there's paths that you can offer, so that when you're in that place, you kind of know where to go. And it's not a quick process. I think that we talk about that space and time again, when it's taken away, you can see everything. You can kind of understand that perspective, the broader perspective, and you're less emotional. But when you're in it, you're so tight with the time and the space of it. And so there is so much that, just, even when you keep embracing it, there will be flows, and and that's the growth. It's like this thing is, it's that chrysalis, it's like turning you, and there will be a point when the process is over and you can be released. But you're in relationship with that, and so it is really important to sort of to share that experience, I guess, and with others, to sort of to bring conversation to how, in experiencing death as the mourner. And I would agree with you, like, when I die, I want my death to be, I want my death to be like, ultimately you kind of just want your death to be witnessed and for everyone to be fine. But that there is going to be sadness, but you hope for that sadness is incorporated into one own's power to grow through. So depending on who is the closest to me, I guess, that I can be a lesson for them. Like, my own experience of my dad passing was a lesson for me. As difficult as it was, it changed my life, and so have my near-death experiences have changed my life. They are all lessons in their own right, and I hope that I will never take anyone down too long, basically, when I die, that I'm a lesson that people can work through and rise from. But when I face death, I did this with a shamanic work. When you do become a shamanic practitioner, you have to experience your own death. And to do that, you go on a deep kind of journey, where you're kind of, you go really deep, and you count the steps of how many years you have left. So I knew how many years I had left. So it wasn't, some people experience a kind of a tragic death or see all the elements, but I actually really didn't see that much. For me, it was just a kind of a witnessing of how far I was walking until my death. And then a moment when I hit a door and I couldn't get through it. And I was kind of hammering on it. I was trying to get through it, and it wouldn't let me in. And I felt like I was on this pinnacle. I felt like my whole life was down there, and I was up here, like I was kind of higher up by this door that I couldn't get through. And I felt really in limbo, and kind of panicky about what to do. And then I realized I just had to accept. And I just accepted that I was dead, and I passed through the door. And I think there have been two moments in my life where I have experienced a separation from my body. One was when I did DMT, which I don't know if anyone has done. And obviously with meditations where you don't feel like yourself, and then this is one. And they are experiences where you separate yourself from your story. So with DMT, I was no longer Tansy. Like, she was gone. I was just consciousness experiencing. And when I came back in, I had to recalibrate with who it was to be Tansy and take back her story and take back, everything that she had accumulated in her life, like all of the people and stories. It's such a separation. With meditation, obviously that transition is much smoother. With the death, there was a separation, but I felt a grief. I knew who I was. It was like I was kind of split in two. I knew that I had been Tansy, and I knew that I was now dead, and I couldn't go back. And I was made to like look in this pool of my life, and I actually felt so much grief for what I was losing through. And I was surprised that I would be going through that. I thought it would just be like, oh, I'm dead and beyond. But I had to, it was its own suffering. It was its own, Tansy had to die. So the physical death was painful. It was quite sudden for me. But when I went up through, then it was the kind of being death. It was the ego death. It was the Tansy, who Tansy was. I had to say goodbye to that life. And all that you want to do is basically kind of turn around and say to everyone that you love them. And you want everyone to be happy. And you also long for one last hug with everyone, but you know that your time has passed. And then I knew I had to, like, whoever I was, Tansy was just a story. And I was like kind of much more than that. And so that was it was such an interesting experience. And I forgot to actually say that before you do the death, you have to live a day as if it's your last. And this was a really important, and I really recommend doing this for other people, because what I thought I would want to do, which was, I had like a whole list of all of these people that I would call, and I'm like, I really love you. And I realized that I loved everybody. So it was a kind of really, really long list. And I thought, okay, well, when I wake up on that morning, I'm going to, do the most amazing things, and I'm going to tell everyone I love them, and I'll probably write letters to everyone. And I woke up in the morning, and all I wanted to do was to just breathe the air, was just to be in the garden. I just wanted to, I was like, they all know I love them. Like, they will all, I just want them to all know that I love them. They all know that I love them anyway. I just want to live one more day alive, like what it means to actually be alive and breathing. And in that way, I was again like less like Tansy and just more like a living, breathing experience of life.
Yeah, no, a really, really beautiful share. I'm so glad that it led you where it did. And I just feel like there's so much of an offering in what you just said, for us all to sit with and take a piece of wisdom to explore in our own life. And the surrender one to we are mortal, the surrender to there is an expiration date. Your story will have an ending, and really sit with that and claim it and turn towards it and embrace it. And then this question that you found yourself in, which is, well, how then will I live? How then will I? Yeah.
It's beautiful. Like, just exactly like, how will you live knowing that you will die? Do the things that you would do, tell the people that you love, tell your friends that you love them, hug your parents. Like, is that argument worth it? Because life can end at any point. Like we have both experienced with losing people, which it was unknown that would happen. It was a sudden, harsh jolting of, of a person out of our life. Now, if we recognize that all of the people around us could die at any moment. It's not to sort of grab them and never let them go, but it's knowing that you are showing up as you would no matter what, whether they died or they didn't, to know that their story will come to an end, and it's a story that they are playing out for their own soul's growth, and you are playing out yours. And that if they pass, they lived their life, they lived their story, but they are kind of beyond that. Like, it's almost like what we have is a memory that we are holding alive, but where we are is right now. You know, it's like we aren't back there, we are right here, and they still exist. They are just in a different form. And so I think we have a tendency to go back and to hold on to fragments of memories, of pieces that aren't there anymore. And the more that we can live in the present with a recognition of that flow and ebb and flow of life, who will we be? What will we do? How will we forgive? How will we surrender? How will we love? And how will we feel surrounded by all the beings that have passed, you know, in all of their greater forms, that everything is with us now.
Yeah. And I feel like even adding there, how will we choose death when our life needs it? I'm thinking of wedding vows right now for partnerships, and I have several friends who are in marriage and finding an ending showing up in their life, and that phrase, "till death do us part," for me has always, and I won't say always, but where I am now, I hear that and it says, "Oh, until we choose death." You know, relationships are a choice. You know, I'm choosing this. I'm choosing this again and again. And they only continue to live as long as that choice is being made. But the empowerment around, oh, we don't just have to wait for you know, death or change or transition to get us and try to process it. But this claiming of it too, of, oh, if I want this to live, you know, how am I going to live? You know, whether it's move, you know, gosh, I really want to live by the ocean, or I've always wanted to have this business or express myself in this way. If I want that to live, there'll be something that you have to close the door to, that you consciously say, you know, no more. And yeah, I feel really inspired by everything that you've shared, and the remembering. It just feels like remembering of this flow, and the stories of each individual, and the attachment that is so easy to fall into. But I'm just feeling that, oh, well, how will I live my last day? And hearing you say, I would breathe in a garden. You know, the love permeates all things. We don't need to speak it. We don't need to write it. We don't need to call it. You know, it's the energy. It's permeating. But I've recognized in myself, because of the loss I had so young, I do, and I've made people uncomfortable potentially, but I do find myself, a word of advice I got from my father's friend was, give people their flowers before they die. And so I find myself just saying, you know, if I just imagine if this person was gone and I attended their funeral, what would I want to say to them? And so it's really freed me up to just, you know, say everything I mean, in short moments, because, you know, when I say goodbye to someone who's had an impact on my life, I don't know when I'll see them again. And so it feels really empowering to freely share from that place of, hey, you've had a really big impact on me, and the story goes on. The story goes on.
I love that. And I wrote down non-attachment just as you said it as well, because also, just like you say, like, we can have friends that we meet for a weekend that we may never meet again. So we call, you know, and so in a way that's a death. We're never going to see them again. But in that moment, it's not like trying to hold on to this forever. Like, okay, well, we will keep doing this. Like, sometimes, and maybe you will connect again. but in that moment to grasp and then to release, and then you're free. Like you said, like freedom is such a powerful word, because then you're free to keep living to whatever is within your space, whoever is in your space, whoever is being tended to know that everyone you leave, like there is it's like not like you're attaching to everything and holding everything and keeping everyone in your life, and it's, it's just like trying to hold on, when actually like you're just constantly imparting your love and you're part of your joy, and you're like, if you're with me tomorrow, next week, in a year, wonderful, but I cannot control that. I have no expectation of it. I just meet life. I'm free because you've attended to everyone in the way that that moment desires. Because like I think we've spoken about before, like every moment is a death. Every time you go on a retreat, at the end, it's a death to that experience. You're not going to have that again. And so, say what you need. And then that way you're rejoicing in every moment. You're sharing your rejoicing of people, and you've never like left something untied, and you're free.
And let the water flow. The water is life. Let the water flow. That's been a huge part of my embrace, is trusting that my tears come when my tears need to come. This is me, this is my body communicating with me, and this is my medicine. And no matter what, no matter why they're showing up, just saying, yes, water is life. I will allow flow to exist. So,
yeah, I love that. It's so funny because it's got dark while we're talking. the transition from light to dark.
yes.
And after this conversation, I really want to share a poem that you wrote about Persephone. And I wonder if like there is, just because I'm going to share it, and I wondered if you wanted to say a little bit about your experience with the myth, if we have a minute of time,
Yeah.
just so that when people listen to it, they can feel like your own connection to it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was really called to sit with Persephone. And as I've found my own way and path, and stories have come to me and myths have shown up, it was the myth of Persephone that and her mother Demeter, that I realized, wow, this has a really there's room for me to explore beyond and beyond in this story. And I have always questioned, because of the journey I had to take, falling into just the mother's perspective, which is, an incredible sadness and incredible grief to losing her daughter to the Lord of the underworld. She tried so hard to protect her and to not give her up to any man, and wanted nothing more than to live a life with her daughter. And so the grief that she feels every time her daughter Persephone has to go back to live in the underworld. And that's the creation myth of our seasons and how we get winter from this grief. And I was always curious, well, what about Persephone's perspective? She is her own woman. And with the tarot, as I'm learning, and all these other angles, she is the queen. She has a throne. She takes up her rightful space in the underworld. And so it's just the story that I've shared, which is nice and short, is just a redreaming from her perspective. It's something to do, if you hear a myth or a story, bring it back to life. This idea that oral tradition should be living and constantly, inevitably changing in some way, because we weren't writing things down. So this person shares this version, this person shares this version. So you get these multi-version myths from history, and so I've been empowered to bring them back to life. What else is there that hasn't been written down? What was told but never remembered? And so that's kind of what I explored with the myth of Persephone.
Oh, I saw you really light up then. In such a beautiful way. It's such a beautiful poem. Like it's like a prose, I guess. But it's beautiful, and it was really it was really beautiful to listen to her perspective and to feel that there was just so much wisdom and trust and like acceptance of like one's own choice, or like her freedom to choose and her freedom to be and her freedom to have her voice shared. It was lovely to listen, and I'm excited to share it with others. You write so beautifully.
Oh, thank you.
You do.
Yeah.
Yeah. Amazing. Well, oh, I've gone fuzzy. It was so lovely to have this conversation with you, and we will be coming back with other conversations when we discover different themes. So this is our exploration of death, and yeah, we will see what comes up for future episodes. But if anybody wants to share their story, then please do reach out to me. My email address is tansyahealing@gmail.com, and you can find me at tansyalexandra.com, which is all down there. And Jackie, where can people find you if they want to connect with you?
Yeah, so my astrology practice is Two Roots Acupuncture, another beautiful sort of synergy of these elements we've been speaking to. So Two Roots, spelled out TWOROOTS acupuncture.com. And you can look at my website, and all my contact info is up there.
Amazing. All right. Be well, and I will speak to you soon.
Okay, thank you, Tansy.
So after recording the conversation that I did with Jackie, which was just such a joy to be able to have that beautiful, rich flow and movement of dialogue as we came to talk about death and our own experiences of it and processing that that experience. But what I left out that she felt like was something important for me to share was my own experience of mourning, of grieving, of experiencing death, the death of someone that was very close to me. And she shares a story about Orpheus. And this is the story about a man who loses his wife, who he loves greatly. And he pursues her down into the underworld to bring her back. And he is told not to look around at her. Otherwise, she will not be able to follow him out of the underworld. And he turns around, looks at her, and then she can't follow him out. And I remember the tragedy of this story. I remember how it would sit with me, it would fill me with so much grief about this man who just couldn't resist but to turn around and then to lose his love again. And so the piece that I think of that was this like that moment of transition as we go into and out of death. And in the myth, it's the passing across the river Styx to get to Hades, like the land of the dead. And on my father's wall, behind his desk, he would have a painting called The Island of the Dead. And in it, there is a boat crossing the river Styx with this ghost upon the boat, going to Hades, going to the island. And so those two, like that story of Orpheus and that the river Styx, that kind of transitioning always used to stay with me. So when I used to see that painting, I used to think about that moment of like losing one's love and the kind of the torment and the trauma of that, and how an instant, a moment can dissolve everything that you love, can change the whole course of your life, and can leave you in a space of deep mourning and grief. And I don't think that, having looked upon that painting above my father's desk, that I fully recognized how it would be him that would be the one taken from me, and that his passing across the river Styx, his passing to the island of the dead, was going to be my grief, was going to be my trauma. And I feel like I kind of want to share in detail, perhaps, what I experienced. And I know we all have our experiences of death, of those who we are very close to, who we love deeply. But how often we talk about them, how often we share our experiences and how they impacted us or how we moved through it is not always shared. So I will share mine. So my father was an incredible man. He made a very deep impact on my life. He was the most extraordinary man that I've ever met, both in terms of his spiritual understanding, his intellect, his creativity, his wisdom, his sense of adventure. And I wanted to be just like him. And I really admired him and respected him and loved him deeply. And he went through a lot in his life. There were lots of ups and downs in terms of what he was put through. But the end was something that came so suddenly and so unexpectedly. I was at my second home, a place I absolutely adore, which is in France, in Chamonix. And I had just been having the most blissful time. It was leading into summer, and I was having lots of fun with my friends. And I got a message from my sister to contact her. And when I did, she told me that my dad was in hospital and he'd had a seizure, but that he was very likely going to be okay. Because if he wasn't, they would have moved him to another hospital. But they were just waiting for him to have a CT scan, but they couldn't do it yet because all the electricity in the hospital had gone out, and they had to wait an hour and a half for the machine to turn on. Now, at that point, I immediately was like, but a CT scan seems like something serious. A seizure sounds like something serious. The fact that there's no power sounds like something serious. But we had been assured that it was all okay. So I spent, the next 2 hours just trying to calm myself down and to not attach to the worst. I really, let go of worry and just waited until I knew before I had any kind of reaction, and felt that I had convinced myself that it would be okay. But as I started walking home, I got a call from my sister, and she said, "Tansy, he's gone." And I fell to my knees and I screamed and wailed. And I just remember that my partner at the time had to take the phone off me because I just could not make sense of the experience and I couldn't speak. And then when I said to him, "He's gone," it was like through just so much grief. But he managed to get me home, and I was just in a complete, it was like a it was like being encased in a glass box. Everything, when people say everything came crashing down, it was like everything went numb and kind of like ringing. It was like I couldn't hear anything. I couldn't process anything. I just felt the most unbelievable expression of grief, shock, despair, and somewhere in there, probably hope that it was all not true. And I remember that, my best friend came to talk to me, and she loved my dad dearly. And she was trying to hold back her own tears. And I wish that she had cried in front of me, because I didn't need her to be strong. I needed to know that I was legitimate, I guess, in my grief. So in a way, sometimes when people cover their own grief, you feel that you are the only one who is holding it. And I really kind of needed to share that. Saying that, she was an incredible support, and she made me feel that I was allowed to be grief stricken. I think I just, in terms of other people, I think just to pass on that, I would say definitely, like, don't feel that you need to be strong, that it's okay that that person recognizes that your grief shows your care too in some ways. But it was such a trauma. And then I remember having to fly back to the UK the next day, and every little thing that happened, I couldn't get through the queue and we were late and I was in tears. And it was just this kind of mess. I just felt like a complete mess. And then I'd hold myself together and I would kind of be normal. And then I would remember and it would break me apart again. But by the time I got home and we were having to organize the funeral really soon afterwards, I remember having to, it was so that all I can feel is like there was this coldness that descended over me, like kind of ice that like froze me in time, that I couldn't possibly feel the amount of grief that I felt. Like it just wasn't possible for my human body to comprehend the level of grief that I was experiencing. And so it shut me down. It like put it into cold storage so that it could be released slowly over time, like so that it would be drip fed to me, because I just couldn't sustain that level of grief. And so then I went into this kind of blank coldness. And I think that's the process. So that's the part when a lot of people say, oh, it's strange, they didn't really seem that upset, or the person who is grieving is like, it's so weird for me because I don't really feel anything. And I think that that is a physical trauma response, deliberately so, because it's too great. The experience of losing someone is so great, so traumatizing, that to be in the full witness of it is so overwhelming that it could drown you. Like it kind of feels too much. So I think there is an automatic process of pulling yourself out of it and freezing everything down and then kind of giving it back to you in little bits that you can then process. It means that the period goes on for so long of like freezing, unfreezing, freezing, unfreezing. And years later, I'd find something that would catch me off guard and I would just break down in tears, or I would tell the story of the moment when I heard those words, like he's gone, that would just bring so many tears to my eyes. I just couldn't help it. And, going to weddings and hearing the father stand up and speak about their daughter, it's things like that that would just bring me back into that grief. But each time, it wasn't like I was trying to get rid of it all. It was like each time I met it and I allowed it and I grieved, and then it passed and I carried on. So, through each of those moments, they became a little bit less frequent, a little bit less intense. And so now it's been, 9 years. And I think it's a true thing to say that you miss them every day. You really do miss them. And you long for them to be there to see things in your life and to hold your hand, to say, it's all going to be okay, or someone to, to talk to you as they would have, to bring you the wisdom that you need to hear at a moment. But there is something amazing about them also not possessing a human body anymore, is that they can be everywhere. So there are times when he wouldn't have been there, like when I was once paragliding or hiking up the tallest mountain in Italy. He would not have physically been there had he been alive, but now that he had passed, he was there with me. He loved paragliding, and when I was paragliding, I said, Dad, come and be with me. And I could feel him just like cooing and excited as we like span through this, as like span in the sky. And I was sharing the experience with him. And the same when I was hiking and it was getting really difficult. And he's like, Tansy, you can do it. I'm here with you. I've got you. And isn't this beautiful? And I was like, it's so beautiful, Dad. Look at it. And I'm so glad you're here with me. And that really helped me, was to feel him around me, that he was with me in a way that was almost closer than he could have been in life. I didn't have his voice. I didn't have his wisdom in the same way. I didn't have his physical form, but I had him. I have his energy around me all the time, and I can speak to him whenever I want. And I actually feel him here right now as I'm telling you this. And I can feel it like a softness and a calmness and a kindness and a resting of the hand on my shoulder, that he's there and he's allowing and he's embracing and he's supporting. And through his death and the grief that I have gone through, I have changed so much as a person, but it hasn't hardened me. It hasn't broken me. It makes me even kind of, in a way, like more open, more free, less attached, more able to help others go into their depths and into their grief and help them find the center of themselves so that they can rebuild, regrow, re-engage with life in a way that is healthy and calm, and like letting go of those attachments that create that suffering for us. And not to say they're no longer there, but it's more that like loving your mother, loving your father, but the clinging to is gone. It's like, you know, that the analogy of the baby bird. And so it's like treasuring what you love, but knowing that it can fly away at any point and you cannot keep it too tight. You cannot crush it. You cannot cage it. And so it's almost like everything that we have in our life, we extend our love and gratitude for them being present in our life, but we don't have hold of them. We don't have expectation that they will always be there. And that is where the attachment is lessened. It's like anything can come and go, just like what Jackie and I were talking about. Is any, you know, anyone, anything can arrive, can be taken. And so it's not about clinging and saying, I'm never going to let you go. It's about opening that hand and saying, I love you while you're here. And I love you beyond. You know, it's like, I love you. I don't need to like have you, own you, cling to you. And I think that process is really helpful in all approaches to life, and to all change, is to recognize that everything moves forward, everything flows, and the less attachment you have, the more easy it is to move forward. But you do so, you know, unattached but loving, unattached but present, unattached but grateful and joyful for. So yes, I thought I would leave you with this story of my own. And I just really hope that you have enjoyed this conversation, and channeling and connection and communication with death, as we've brought it to you. So I look forward to speaking to you again next time.
It is true, I did not choose my lover. I was plucked from blissful airs in a wash of wonder as I admired the most beautiful narcissus flower I'd yet seen that spring. I was yanked, stolen, and pulled abruptly and roughly, down and down and down further into the depths of darkness amid the musty rank of all-consuming earth. Decomposing layer by layer through the dragging below. An unfamiliar terrain, to be sure, a nightmarish shock, but a land I now hold dominion over. And for what rhythm was lacking in my heavenly yet richly one-tone life is now made up for in the ebb and flow of my movements. Visiting my mother above now brings fertility, and my return home casts the shadows of winter upon the earth. It is, however, the shadow of my mother that chills the lands. a chill I alone could feel in her perpetual tending to me. Yet I assure you, I was never meant to live in her shadow. My own life did not fully emerge until a life that was not my own, I've now realized, was given its timely and rightful transition. For what am I when under the stark shadow of my mother? What life is a maiden without free range to explore another? My mother wishes still to keep me all for herself. And indeed, there is safety and abundance and eternal innocence in my former life. But I will never be empowered in that world, will never be a creator there, always a participant. But here, as wife to Pluto, I am worshipped and honored as the sacred lover to the sacred energy of returning, of descending, of ripening, of maturation, of endings that lead to, yes, metaphorical and often too literal deaths. And the stories will have you believe that I was tricked into eating pomegranate seeds. The world, like my mother, is really foolish to my perceived naivety, failing to see the truth that I could fall in love with my taker, that I could fall in love with dissension, and that I would choose to stay however I may. And mind you, as it happened to me, no one, and I mean no one, chooses to arrive here. Yet it is the fate of all mortal ones to end up here. And in my rescuing, of which no one asked if I desired, no one also bothered to ask if I wanted to stay. No one bothered to ask if I truly wanted my life to return as it was. No one bothered to ask if honoring my mother's wishes should trump my own heart-led, self-guided life, albeit merging and married to the darkest nights of one's soul. It is my mother who grieves change, not I. Death in some way is married to each of us. So I ask you, what type of lover will you be to your own dark night? When you realize you can't leave, not entirely, would you choose to stay? Orpheus, the son of a muse, was a renowned poet and legendary musician. Endowed with musical skills that could entice even the most disinterested soul, his charms were irresistible. But it was the nymph Eurydice that caught Orpheus's eye, the only maiden he ever loved. And it is said that the two led a happy life, while Orpheus bared his soul playing his lyre and his wife reciprocated with a dance. They were so madly in love that soon they got married by Hymenaeus, the god of marriage himself. However, at this moment of pure bliss, Hymenaeus prophesied that happiness had an expiration date. Eurydice was a nymph of uncontested beauty, and this beauty did not go unnoticed. A minor god named Aristaeus attacked Orpheus and attempted to snatch Eurydice right after their wedding. Eurydice ran as far as she could into the forest, fleeing her assailant. But just as Hymenaeus prophesied, she was bitten by a venomous snake, and slowly the unbridled joy began to leave her body. She fell quick, and she fell hard. Eurydice was dead, and Orpheus had lost his soulmate. Orpheus was devastated. Without her, life on earth was meaningless. He decided that he was ready to do whatever it takes for his beloved. He then took his lyre and went to claim her back from the dead. Orpheus managed to get into the underworld by enchanting the three-headed guardian hound Cerberus with his music. He then began wandering amongst the souls of the dead until he reached the thrones of Pluto and Persephone, the king and queen of the underworld. When they asked him what he was seeking, Orpheus played his lyre and sang. His song was the saddest and most beautiful song to ever be played in the underworld. Orpheus sang about his love for Eurydice and her tragic death. He then sang about his sorrow and how he wished to get his wife back. It is said that while he sang all his heart to the sound of his sweet lyre, the bloodless ghosts themselves were weeping. And the royal queen, nor he who rules the lower world, could deny the prayer of Orpheus. Orpheus was successful in convincing the gods of the underworld to return him to his wife. However, Pluto and Persephone asked him to follow one simple rule. Orpheus would lead the way out of Hades, but he would not be allowed to look behind him until Eurydice had left the underworld completely. Orpheus did not hesitate for a second and accepted the proposition. Pluto then presented him with Eurydice, and Orpheus began the long ascension to the world of the living. Orpheus managed to remain calm and did not look back throughout the whole trip. However, the closer they were getting to the light of the world of the living, the more enthusiastic and impatient he became. When the first beam of light touched his face, Orpheus immediately turned around to hug his beloved. And it was at that moment he realized his terrible mistake. He was standing in the world of the living, but Eurydice was still standing in the dark world of the dead. Her last spoken word was farewell, which he could barely hear, and with no further sound she fell from him again to the underworld. Orpheus sang like he never sang before. Truly, he wailed. He wailed everywhere about his sorrow and lost love, his second loss truly more unbearable than the first. He sang and sang until one day he met his own end and was once again reunited, this time for good, with his love, Eurydice, in the underworld.